If you stumbled across the idea of teaching English abroad, you may have seen that you can teach English in countries around the world and might be wondering which country you should teach English in. Well, in this video, I'm going to talk about teaching English in Vietnam as an option, as well as some of the alternatives that you could consider. I'm Alex from Ninja Teacher, and let me start off by saying there's no right or wrong answer to which country you should start teaching English in. English language learning is an over $10 billion market, and that's expected to double in the next 10 years or so. So there are opportunities in countries around the world, and at Ninja Teacher we've helped over 1,000 people move abroad, get trained to be English teachers and get jobs, with the majority being here in Vietnam, but our teachers have taught all around the world. So this video comes from our understanding of the teaching English market here in Vietnam, as well as knowledge of the worldwide teaching English market. And it's also just sharing my personal experiences and thoughts. I've taught English in South Korea and Vietnam, and I'm biased. I really like Vietnam. I like living here. I'm very positive about Vietnam in general. So that informs my opinions, and you can take this all as one perspective to help you make up your mind about what country to teach English in. So let's start off with why teach English in Vietnam. Well, first of all, the salary to living cost ratio is really good in Vietnam. With what you earn as an English teacher in Vietnam, even as a first-time English teacher, and the living cost here, you're going to be able to live really comfortably, eat out and have delicious food in Vietnam. The cost of transport is really low using Grab to get around. And if you're not spending like crazy, you can also save money here. The work-life balance in Vietnam is also really good. So teaching hours in Vietnam are typically around 18 to 24 teaching hours per week for a full-time position. And you do have to spend time lesson planning for those lessons. But even with that, your work week is not going to be too crazy, and you're definitely going to have plenty of free time to do whatever you want with. Whether that's exploring the great nightlife in Vietnam, spending time at cute cafes, or basically doing whatever you want. I also love Vietnam for its travel opportunities, whether that's in Vietnam exploring all the amazing places that there are to see in Vietnam, or traveling to nearby countries very affordably and easily. There are also good career development opportunities in the TEFL market. TEFL standing for Teaching English as a Foreign Language. We've seen a lot of our alumni start out teaching and then get into management roles. And the more experience you get, the more opportunities open up. We had one of our alumni just stop by now who said he's working online to get his teaching license online while he's teaching English here, so that he can get into international schools, which is a slightly different market to TEFL teaching, but a lot of people end up going into international schools in the long run. And there are a lot of international schools in Vietnam that hire foreign teachers. And then just to talk a little bit about Vietnam as a country on the whole, I just personally feel like Vietnam is on the right path, and it's a great country to be living in. Economically, the country is developing very fast. It's becoming more and more modern, but still retaining the charm of Southeast Asian countries. Everywhere you look, there's development going on. Vietnamese people are very hardworking, but also know how to have a good time. And Vietnam is still a developing country, so not everything works perfectly all the time, but everything is also very convenient and efficient. You can order a meal online through the Grab app and get it within 20 minutes. A great delicious meal for about $3, and someone will just pull up on a motorbike and deliver it straight to your door. There's lots of little things like that in Vietnam where I think day-to-day life is actually really convenient in Vietnam. And I've seen that Vietnam really seems to be opening up to the world. While many countries have very strict policies on many different things, Vietnam seems to be looking to make things easier in a lot of ways. Vietnam's policies and mindsets seem to be wanting to collaborate with the rest of the world and try and work together to continue to build and grow. And you can see how that influences the English learning market. Every parent wants their child to be able to speak English and will often invest a lot in helping their children get to a high level of English proficiency. So overall, I think Vietnam is a great country to teach English in. There are a lot of opportunities, you have good work-life balance, and the country as a whole is growing and developing. So let's talk about some of the other countries that you can consider working in. So I taught English in South Korea for a year, and I actually had an amazing time in South Korea overall. It was my first time living and working abroad. I had many amazing experiences, and overall it was a positive experience for me. Some of my favorite things about South Korea were the food. It's also very developed. Everything runs very smoothly and well there. Getting around on the metro system is really convenient. There's the KTX train that goes right across the country. It's their high-speed rail. And in terms of teaching English there, I went through the EPIC program, which stands for English Program in Korea, which is the government-run program. And I think this is a really good program because the teaching hours are reasonable. You only have to teach, I believe it was 24 teaching hours per week. And they also run a really good orientation program when you first arrive in South Korea, which is actually something I use for inspiration for what we do now with Ninja Teacher. Because moving to a new country, you really want that support and getting some help with that whole process of settling into a new country. The downsides of the EPIC program is that you get placed somewhere in the country with no choice in the matter of where that's going to be, and you only find out after you arrive in South Korea. And also they just accept limited number of people, and because it's so well known, I believe they bring in maybe a couple of hundred people per year, but I assume there's thousands of applications for those positions, so it can be quite competitive to get into. And if you really like South Korea as a country, then you can try applying to the EPIC program and see if you get in. If you do, then that's great. And I had a good enough experience through EPIC that I would personally recommend it. On the other hand, there's the private English academies in South Korea called hagwons. And the thing about hagwons is there's mixed reviews of how those jobs are. South Korean culture can be very work-focused. And I think a lot of these jobs will actually have you teaching 30 to 35 hours per week or even more. And while that might not sound like a lot if you haven't taught before, it actually is quite a big workload for an English teacher. So sometimes the hours of hagwons are really long, and some people get great jobs with hagwons. And I've also heard of people that don't like their jobs that much. One good thing about teaching English in South Korea is apartments are often provided as part of the contract, which is nice. However, I have noticed that the salaries in South Korea have not gone up a whole lot since I was teaching there nearly 10 years ago, while the living costs have increased. So South Korea was always known for being a pretty good deal with the salaries to living costs, and I think it still can be, especially with an apartment included. However, maybe not quite as good as they used to be 10, 15 or even 20 years ago. I'll also say that while I met some amazing Korean people, my experience is that Vietnamese people are a bit warmer, more friendly and open than South Korean people. It's a big generalization, I know. I'm just talking about my experience. I personally feel a little bit more comfortable in Vietnam than South Korea. And there's amazing people all around the world, but sometimes you just connect with certain cultures more than others, and that was the case for me. Okay, let's talk a bit about Thailand. So I really love Thailand. The food is absolutely amazing. The people there are so friendly and nice. It is called the land of smiles after all. And there's a reason why it's one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. I think 40% of their economy or something like that is from tourism. Bangkok is a mega city. It's got so much going on there, and all the beaches and islands are beautiful in Thailand. I really like going to travel in Thailand. That being said, the teaching English salaries for especially new teachers are on average lower than they are in Vietnam, with similar living costs. So we get a lot of people contacting us who said they initially wanted to go teach English in Thailand and then saw that difference and then started considering Vietnam. Obviously money isn't everything, so if you really like Thailand and it's not as important to you, then absolutely consider teaching English in Thailand. But for a lot of people, having a bit more of a gap between what you earn and what you spend on a day-to-day basis really is important to them as well. Also, from my knowledge of the market in Thailand, the majority of jobs are out in provinces around Thailand. It's much harder to get a job in central Bangkok. So if you do want a city kind of lifestyle, you're going to have a lot easier time getting a job in a place like Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi in Vietnam than you are in the center of Bangkok. And just to mention about salaries again, there are good opportunities in different countries as well. So I'm sort of talking about the entry level, the average, that if you're going to get your first job in a country, that's what you're looking at. But once you've got more experience and qualifications, you can potentially find great jobs in different countries, like Thailand, for example. But having experience and maybe further qualifications over and above your initial TEFL certification can really help to get those higher paying jobs. But if you're just looking at getting a job straight off your TEFL certification or even with a bit of teaching background, you're most likely to be getting a lower salary on average than many other countries in Asia. Let's briefly talk about Japan. So Japan was the OG of teaching English. I've heard of people in my parents' generation going to teach English in Japan, and it was one of the most popular options to go teach English in, like 20, 30, even 40 years ago. But based on my knowledge of the evolution of the TEFL market, Japan had its heyday and then started to get replaced by countries like South Korea, which offered better wages and lower living costs. And Japan's known for its hectic work culture. So I think even when I went abroad to teach English, Japan was already considered not the best option, at least from the point of view of the salaries to living costs. And from what I've seen, some people hear about teaching English in Japan, and then once they go out and start researching all the different details, they often end up picking a different country. Maybe because the big cities like Tokyo and Osaka that people really would want to go live in are extremely expensive. And I think with what you earn as an English teacher, especially a newer teacher, it's going to be very hard to live comfortably there. And from what I heard, most people are teaching around the country in smaller cities, which in that case, the cost of living is going to be lower, and then you could have a better salary to living cost ratio. And like I mentioned before, once you get more experience and potentially more qualifications, there are more and more opportunities that open up and some better paying jobs. So maybe you could go to Japan after you've got some more experience and then find a well-paying job there. I also know that there's a lot of people who really love Japanese culture. So if that's you and high salaries aren't your biggest priority, then Japan could still be a good option for you. The JET program is the Japanese government-run English program in Japan, and that's considered to be really well run and well known, and people have good experiences of teaching through that. So it's kind of like the equivalent of the EPIC program in South Korea that I went through. So that's one you could consider applying for, but I believe that's even more competitive than the EPIC program in South Korea to get into. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so let's talk about China. Now, if higher salaries and Asia are your top priorities, I think China is known to be one of the highest paying places for English teachers. I've seen some really good offers of salaries in China, and we've had some of our alumni go and get well-paying jobs in China. And there's some things to consider about China, one being that it's just so big. So there's so many cities in China that might be hiring, and you might not even have heard of that city before. I sometimes hear about a city that's got a population of like 10 or 20 million people that I'd never even heard of before in China. And if you teach English in China, it's likely you'll get a job in some city you might not even have heard of, and likely not Beijing or Shanghai, the first tier cities, which are also more expensive. But if you do live in a lower tier city, the cost of living is also going to be lower, so people can and do save quite a lot of money teaching English in China. But getting a job in a city you might not know much about, it might be quite difficult to find out about the school that you've been offered a job at, because it's just such a big country, there might not even be information online about that school. And then I think China is just quite intimidating in general. You know, the barrier to entry with the language is quite high. Everything is written in Mandarin Chinese, so it's very hard to get by when you first get there. Whereas a country like Vietnam, the alphabet is mostly the same as the English alphabet. So you can actually type something and then you'll get the results on Google Maps. And then a lot of websites are blocked in China. There's the global political situation. So I think for these reasons, a lot of people find teaching English in China quite intimidating. But on the other hand, I've met quite a lot of people that have taught English in China and really enjoyed their experience there. Then talking of countries with good salaries, the Middle East has a lot of countries that have very high salaries for English teachers. So countries like the United Arab Emirates and others, you can earn quite well as an English teacher, although they often do want teachers with a bit more experience. So it can be a good option, maybe if you've taught English for a couple of years in another country, to go there if you want to spend some time there, earning and saving some money. I think the lifestyle there is going to be quite different to what it is in Asia. A lot of people I've spoken to that have done it have lived on compounds in these countries, which are sort of self-sustaining communities. And you can look into what the lifestyle is like a bit more there. Personally, it's not for me, but if it is something that you want to do and you like the sound of it and maybe you want to go for a while and save more money, this could be a good option for you. And then lastly, I'm going to just broadly speak about Europe and Latin America. I think a lot of countries in Europe people want to go live in. The visa situation can be a little bit tougher there, and I just think the demand in Europe and South America is just not as high as it is in Asia. So the cost of living and the salaries that you earn, the ratio is just not quite as good. I know people that love living in countries in Europe and South America, but from everything that we've heard, most people who look into it gravitate more towards Asia for better salaries and overall lifestyle that you can have. And again, as I mentioned, there are good opportunities for English teachers all over the world, and they can be in Europe and South America too. But we get a lot of people that are contacting us that say, I was originally looking at South America or Europe, but it just didn't seem like as good a deal as when you come out to countries in Asia. So obviously I'm speaking very broadly there. And to be honest, our expertise is more on the Asia side of the world. So I'm sure there are good opportunities there as well. But from everything I've heard, just in general in Europe and South America, it's not going to be quite as good salaries to living costs. But of course, look into it, and as you get more experience and qualifications, you can get a good job pretty much anywhere in the world. And actually, I'd love to hear more from people who've taught English in Europe or South America. So if you have, leave a comment below and let us know how your experience was. So that's what I have to share on why I think teaching English in Vietnam is a great option, as well as some information about some of the other countries that you can teach English in based on our knowledge of the market and also my experiences and personal preferences. If you'd like to start teaching English abroad, you can click the link below and head over to ninjateacher.com to learn more about how we can help you with the whole process. And if you're interested in watching more content about living and teaching English in Vietnam, you can watch this video over here. Subscribe to the channel for more videos, and I'll speak to you soon. Peace.